Hello everyone. I'm really happy to have overcome all the technical problem. I don't know if we overcame it for the the long or the total duration of the talk. We'll see. Hopefully, I'm really happy to welcome Peter. So maybe you don't know Peter, but I think all of us and all of the Tournesol gang have seen a video who has been inspired by a paper of Peter Törnberg here. And it is a video which is called "The Internet is Worse Than Ever. Now What?" from the YouTube channel Kurzgesagt. And it has an evaluation of 61 on Tournesol. So you don't know Peter, but 61 for us. It's a great evaluation. So here we almost all agree then, because that's not only us who are like evaluating, but like we part of the team and the people who are evaluating. Not myself actually, but all the other people here. Um, and yeah, so that's based on your paper, which was that I really did enjoy, which is how digital media drive affective polarization through partisan sorting, which is, I think, a really good explanation on the mechanism behind the affective polarization that we see on social network. And personally, I really liked your book, which was seeing like a platform, which is really, really insightful about how a platform is seeing and actually shaping the world we live in. So yeah, really happy to have you. And you're going to talk about a new paper. So the paper is not out, I think. And yeah, please feel free to present it the way you want. Really happy to welcome you here at the Tournesol Talk, which are the talk we organize every once once in a while about recommendation algorithm and social network. Yeah, to deepen our understanding of social network because we try to make better recommendation algorithm at Tournesol. Yeah. So yeah, please feel free to talk and to present your work.
Great, thank you, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to meet you, everyone, digitally. And sorry for the technical
Yeah.
problems. It's always when with a new app, it's always an adventure. Um, so yeah, I'll talk about a paper that I'm about to finish, and it's kind of a bringing together a lot of my research um, paper and trying to kind of take stock and see where we are at as a field relating to social media and also computational social science, and raising this question of what is taking place right now with social media as a system, and about the assumptions that we're making as researchers around social media and social media data, and to the extent to which they still hold. So especially for this crowd, it might be a bit of in general, is a bit of a provocation in relation to whether social media is going to stick around in the shape that we've known it. Because and it's really connecting to this notion that social media has been this kind of lens through which we understand society, and that is kind of built around platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and ideas of kind of network publics, participatory culture, algorithmic governance, and so on. So this notion that social media has not just been an object of study, but really a kind of master metaphor for the digital age, and it's shaped our theorization. And so I'll say my thesis from the outset, so you know what's coming. And the thesis is that social media is coming to its end, and that we need new concepts, we need new methods to face this coming post-social era. And the what I'll kind of the structure of the talk is that I'll first describe what I understand as the social media paradigm. What is this? What has this paradigm been, both for research and for society? And then I'll make my argument that we are coming closer to the end of the social media era. And then finally, I'll discuss what a post-social media paradigm might be. How might research be restructured and are thinking about society and digital technology, how might that need to be restructured in the face of what's coming after social media? But so first, let's talk about the social media paradigm and what it's been. And I think one of the kind of central pillars of social media and platforms more general is this notion of user-generated content. That the very definition of a platform is that it relies on users for content production, and that it kind of shapes and direct user production, how users produce content in order to achieve certain goals. But is in the question of what user-generated content, how to understand user-generated content. It's very, for the social sciences, it's been very centrally understood as a lens on social behavior in different forms. And it's basically created, I'm just teaching an introductory course on computational social science, and kind of showing to my students how the rise of digital data from social media was really central to the very emergence of computational social science as a discipline and kind of digital data analytics. And based around this idea that we can use digital data from platform and social media as a lens into real behavior to a certain extent. And we saw a kind of shift from surveys and interviews to this kind of large-scale observational and behavioral data that shaped and defined a certain discipline. And this is very much what my book Seeing Like a Platform is about, and as well as my work on computational, heterodox computational social science, which is kind of describing how the discipline of computational social science and how our scientific understanding was shaped by the data that was available. And I think relatedly here is this notion of social media as a public sphere. So this connects to this kind of early optimism about the internet, where the internet was supposed to create a new democratic renaissance. It's kind of linked to Habermas's structural transformation of the public sphere, where he's basically making the argument that democracy was driven and enabled by these kind of spaces where people could come together and discuss printed press and so on, and that enabled democratic deliberation and dialogue, which is Dewey described as the very soul of democracy. So this notion that what happens on social media is a kind of deliberation, it's a dialogue. And so this was really central to the early days of social media in like the mid-90s or so, when scholars were kind of thinking about in Habermas and saw that the internet could provide a new version of what Habermas described as the kind of coffee houses of the French Revolution and so on. And that was mainly like the central debate of a lot of the last 20 years has been this debate between that notion of the social media as a public sphere and the notion of social media as echo chamber. So already in 1999, Cass Sunstein, of course, as we all know, wrote about this idea that, okay, sure, if we're coming together and we're meeting this agreement, that means that we're going to deliberate and we're going to kind of arrive at the shared understanding. But internet also enables us to avoid others. And so Sunstein argued that it would create these echo chambers, which creates these cycles where isolation leads to extremism and radicalization, which leads to more isolation. But I think the interesting thing here that I would like to note is the fact that it's still making this notion of an Habermasian idea of a critical, rational deliberation, that is what we're doing on the internet. And basically casting this kind of idea of we can understand social media through a social graph. Like if people are talking to each other across the partisan divide, then we get more moderation, we come together, we get social cohesion. But if we say polarized network, there will also be polarized debate. It will cause polarization. And so we can basically understand and see society through the network. So this was like really a central understanding of what social media is that was really at the heart of this social media paradigm, this structural perspective, at least in a lot of political science. And of course, this was also very much driven by the availability and simplicity of using social network analysis to do this type of study. At the same time, in other parts of the social sciences, we had the understanding of social media as more of a kind of stage. So taking more instead of Habermasian perspective, taking a more Goffmanian approach, so thinking of social media as a place where we write ourselves into being. We do performances, we do impression management and identity formation. And so basically these are spaces, so a lot of studies on kind of Instagram and specifically in relation to gender, on how we produce ourselves through social media and how social media as a stage shapes our identities. And I think an interesting shift that I've been part of working on is also the connecting these two literature. So the fact that radicalization and politics is also taking place through this type of identity formation. So the kind of taking the Goffmanian approach to understanding how social media is reshaping our politics in certain ways. So those are type of perspectives that on debates that have been really central in understanding social media and what we do on social media and how it affects our lives and our politics. And the second part has been the kind of question of the economic dimensions. So social media as a form of platform capitalism and being part of what's been referred to as digital capitalism or surveillance capitalism or platform capitalism. And so this comes from the idea of platforms as a kind of proprietary market. So in the same way as neoliberalism has brought the kind of marketization and of more and more aspects and privatization of more and more aspects of society, the platforms are kind of representing the privatization of the market itself. And this was a kind of a model that emerged after 2008. And it's a uniquely digital form of business model where they're basically leveraging control over kind of chokehold points of the economy in order to extract rents. So it's been referred to also as rentier capitalism. And this is based on this kind of that social media enabled network effect. So basically a platform works better the more people are on it, which means that it's very hard to compete with an established platform. And so you get these kind of semi-monopolies that give a lot of power to these platforms. So in the case of social media, we see that platforms have the power to manipulate behavior through algorithms and data. There's targeted advertising, algorithms management, and so on. So this is kind of like the core idea that the platforms and social media are extracting data that is functioning as a form of capital in the contemporary economy, which is linked to kind of questions of financialization and the kind of longer trends of capitalism in which data's capacity to control and predict behavior makes it very valuable for these companies. And so because of this, platforms and social media are designed for datafication. Like, we must understand them. It's been argued that we have to understand them as their purpose as extracting valuable social data, and that in fact the kind of sociality that we've been focusing, the kind of user content production is just kind of a byproduct of what's their actual purpose, which is shaping a kind of attention economy where they create markets where users compete to produce the most attention grabbing, the most engaging content. And so this has been described in the literature of the effects of this. When you have when you're maximizing data extraction and engagement, you also very much undermine constructive dialogue. So you have engagement-driven algorithms which tend to reward outrage, negativity bias, and a kind of general focus on attention extraction rather than deliberation. This can also lead to stuff like misinformation, because if you don't have to be truthful, it's easier to write something that grabs more attention. So, like, of course, we know all this, but I think it is useful parts for understanding this social media paradigm that we've been in the last 25 years or so. And I think an example can be, so who posts on politics on Facebook? So this is from a paper of mine from 2 weeks ago or so in Journal of Quantitative Description, where I basically look at a bunch of connections in 2020 and 2024 it's using a representative sample of the US population of 8,000 respondents and seeing who uses different social media platforms and how is it related to stuff like affective polarization. And what you see is that the more effectively polarized someone is, the more likely they are to post on Facebook. And so this naturally leads to a kind of what Chris Bale calls the social media prism, where we see everything as being more extreme. So that there's a false polarization. We see the other side as more extreme than they actually are. And this, as I argue in my PNS paper, can lead to a kind of trigger bubble. So we can get polarization driven by the fact that we understand the other side is more extreme, which create a kind of feedback loop. So this was probably a lot of repetition of things you already know, but
Excuse me.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I talk?
For sure.
Yeah. Can you show the graph again, please?
Yeah.
To be sure I understood, it means that there are less posts, but they are more polarized. Is
So
that
this
it?
graph shows it uses the feeling thermometer, which is basically the definition of effective polarization. So it's like how warmly or coldly do you feel about one party, and how like about the Democrats, and how warmly and coldly do you feel about the Republicans. And then I'm basically just looking at from people who feels maximally hateful against the Democrats, and then on the other side, maximally hateful against the Republicans. And then the ones in the middle don't feel, either they feel the same hatred to both parties, or they just feel lukewarm in general. So they're not effectively polarized. And what you see is that the people who are the maximally hateful towards one party, that's the maximally angry, the maximally effectively polarized, is a very clear correlation to how often they post. So the more angry you are about politics, the more you post, basically.
Okay, but yeah, it means there are less posts in 2024 than in 2020.
Yeah, so that's a separate that I explore a lot more in the paper. But it's in general, use of Twitter and Facebook has fallen about 50%
Okay.
from 2020 to 2024. That's
Okay.
kind of the main actual takeaway from the paper.
Oh,
But
yeah.
Thank you very much.
yeah, and there's also fewer. I'll get to this. You get to this slide soon. So cool. Yeah, so as a kind of summary of the social media paradigm, I would say that it's been defined by a kind of central tension between agency of users and kind of user participation, and the economy of platforms, and the way that platforms are steering and directing behavior in a certain way. And the focus of the literature has been on the kind of unexpected emergent effects that is driven by these tension. So the way that the platforms are pursuing their political models, their political economy, their kind of interest, their business model, and that has caused unexpected social political consequences in the form of polarization, radicalization, and misinformation, and so on. And at the same time, we have this actually real space for things like virality, memes, participatory online culture, and like the alternatives ways of being. That have also been really central focus of study in this field. But basically, the understanding of social media data and what we do on social media as being kind of humans interacting and leaving traces that provide behavioral data that we can use to understand the social world has been really central, not only to the social media research, but basically to the emergence of the kind of social science disciplines that are today really central to the social sciences. So digital data analysis and computational social science. And so that's basically my description of this paradigm. And feel free to jump in if you have any questions or comments. So let's turn to the second part, the end of social media as we know it. So why do I think that this paradigm is coming to its end? So the first point of evidence is just the fact that people really don't like social media anymore. We can debate how much that matters for anything, but if you ask young people, especially, most people would at this point actually prefer a world without the internet, and even more would prefer a world without social media. People feel bad when they use social media. They feel like it's destroying their ability to interact with others, that it's negative for their communities, and that is having really negative consequences for society and politics. And so that's what they feel about it. But we're also, as I was just alluding to, seeing really strong numbers suggesting that people are also actively leaving social media. So we're seeing a growing number of people who use no social media platform. But I think it's a much stronger effect, the fact that people are, maybe they're still using, they still have a user and they still log in occasionally. But in terms of posting and participating, we see a fall by almost 50% on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And we can also see that is the youngest age group and the oldest age group that are most opting out from social media. So, and it's precisely the kind of conventional social media platforms that best fit this kind of description that we came from, that this kind of behavioral data paradigm emerged from. So platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And at the same time, so there's this kind of collapse in engagement that results from this, where almost basically no post that is sent actually gets any interaction on platforms like Facebook and Instagram, where about out of 10,000 people who see a post, about 15 people will like, comment, or share. So there's like very little interaction on platforms. It's like kind of turns into lurking. And there's also a very strong fall on trust of the platforms, where people see social media as being just unreliable and not useful. And another shift that I think we're seeing is that because platforms and social media are such competitive spaces for attention, the type of content that we initially theorize social media through, which is this kind of, Habermasian, as I said, like this kind of Habermasian deliberation and discussion in the public sphere, or the kind of identity formation, like it's becoming less and less present, because content is so strongly competitive. It's so shaped by the competitive pressures that it just stops being not only deliberative, but it stops being narrative based at all. And we're seeing this kind of rise of what's called ASMR, so autonomous sensory meridian response, which is to me really like the lowest form of content, where it's just a kind of nails scraping to kind of trigger a tingling or calming sensation, like there's whispering and so on. And so the point is more that it's like we've gone from this kind of narrative and deliberation to really just sensorial activation that is really difficult to understand as being useful and informative data from the kind of behavioral Habermasian paradigm that we came from. And then we're also seeing the rise, this is relatedly, we're seeing the rise of kind of short form video as replacing the conventional kind of user participation systems. And so these aren't really deliberation or participatory in the sense of conventional legacy social media platforms. And it's more that we don't have this kind of network-based perspectives that shaped a lot of our understanding, as I said about the social network analysis approach to social media and then to behavioral data. So we're leaving the kind of producer paradigm that was a really central part of this. And of course, the kind of elephant in the room is AI slop, right? So generative AI is just taking over the platforms, and it's now really difficult to because users are posting so much AI content. And I think it's interesting, I think that the kind of, you might call it the shrimp Jesus era of social media, which is of course this kind of early 2023 people posting shrimp shaped as Jesus and getting a lot of kind of shares. and it has this kind of slop dimension, which is this sense that maybe people know that it's fake, but no one really cares because it's kind of beside the point. It's in this kind of very kind of postmodern sense of veracity that things don't really matter anymore. And also the fact that the social media platforms were very happy to allow this type of content because the only thing that they care about is getting more engagement and getting more attention to be extracted. And at the same time, as we're seeing this, the platforms were initially kind of worried about this, but we're then seeing the rise of kind of platforms shifting to using generative AI themselves to replace the users that are quickly leaving their platforms. So we see across platforms, social media companies turning to generative AI to replace users. And the kind of probably most cringe week, of course, comes from Facebook that have this introducing social profiles for Meta AI. So you can have the funny man that you can talk to on social media on Facebook, and since your friends are all quiet. And of course, another dimension that we've seen here is that we see a flight to kind of group chats and smaller spaces. And so this is also something that's actually being implemented in the platforms, with Instagram and TikTok being based largely around this kind of private group chats, because mainstream platforms are kind of becoming this kind of AI slop, boomer towns. And so people are instead retreating to private chat groups and micro communities, things like Patreon, Substack, Discord, WhatsApp, and the kind of Instagram chats. And so those are my 8 points of kind of parallel and entangled shifts that we're seeing as a kind of evidence of the collapse of contemporary or of conventional legacy social media. And my observation of what is coming next is, like, based on this, I think we're seeing the 3 different forms that are kind of emerging after this, which is algorithmic broadcast platforms and kind of semi-private spheres of group chats and so on, and also finally chatbots as a new form of media. And so let's zoom in and look a little bit closer on what those 3 forms of media consists of. So the first is kind of like studying this kind of AI slop platforms, and I think the way of understanding this is kind of really as a return of broadcast media, but in a new algorithmic form. Because on platforms like TikTok and also now more and more Instagram, there is very little of this kind of user-generated behavior. There's a small number of people who are producing semi-professional videos that are then getting a lot of attention. I think that the best kind of evidence for this happening is this lawsuit filed against Facebook for being a monopoly market on social media. And they responded in the lawsuit that actually they can't be a monopoly social media company because they're not a social media company. Only 8% of activity on Facebook is users seeing other user content. It's almost all just people watching like Instagram Reels or Facebook Reels, and it's just become a kind of broadcast medium. But it's interesting, a broadcast medium that is quite different from television. So the kind of methods that we use to study and understand television doesn't really work anymore, since everything is fully algorithmic and kind of individualized. And user engagement and behavior that used to be relevant, which is kind of liking and commenting and so on, has really been replaced just by maybe your eyes staying on a video for 1 second longer, and then being algorithmically taken up to determine which video you get next by algorithms that we really don't have access to. And so it's a return of the kind of the audience. And when we're studying these platforms, we can't understand this as studying studying behavior. Like, we can't view it as studying sociality, because we're really just studying the behavior of a broadcast medium filtered through an opaque algorithm. And so this means that we kind of need to move from this kind of social network perspective that dominated in the previous paradigm, and mapping the kind of connections between people, to instead focusing on kind of content exposure, tracing the kind of flows of content from these platforms and who it reaches, and focusing on the kind of trying to understand algorithms and auditing the algorithms and what content is shown to whom. So really a shift from this kind of relational to more distributive analysis, which is really posing quite important challenges to the field of computational social science and anyone who does media studies. And this is also entangled to, as I alluded to, the return of the audience, which so this idea of people passively watching something, and what matters is not, we can't really see people as participants in social media anymore, but it's rather a question of what reaches a certain user, and the kind of recommendation logic of the platforms. And so this requires new methods, and some things that people have been working on is that kind of using simulated accounts, for instance, using large language models or generative AI to pretend like they're users, and then to track how that shapes recommendation and exposure, but also data donation to see what users actually see depending on their various characteristics. So the next one, as I mentioned, is the kind of rise of the kind of semi-private group chat, semi-private community. And so this is interesting. It kind of follows the description of Habermas, where Habermas was kind of talking about the rise of the public sphere and how the public sphere diminished with the rise of broadcast television, and people retreated to the private sphere and the sofa to watch television with their family. And so we're seeing something more or less aligned to that. So the rise of a kind of digital private sphere, and really a shift in both the logic of visibility, which means that this kind of performative communication that I talked about at the top of this presentation, so the kind of writing yourself into being, this expressing yourself through the platform, that is being replaced with something more intimate, more trust-based, and also that this kind of role of like parasocial relationships becomes more important than things like virality. That being said, I think it's important to note that virality can still be there in this kind of private group chat. So we saw in both Brazil and India, we've seen misinformation spread on WhatsApp, where it's basically being shared between WhatsApp groups, even though there's not really built-in features for that type of virality. You can still get it even in private group chats. So centrally, of course, the challenge for using this kind of private spaces as research objects is the challenge of data access, because both it's practically difficult to get access to these communities. It's harder to get kind of representative samples in the way that we imagine that we could do with platforms like Twitter or Facebook. But it's also centrally like a different type of thing. And it means that the kind of perspectives that we've built in relation to Twitter and Facebook, where we have this kind of, large scale kind of God's eye view, like these big studies in nature where they're like, we trace patterns over time and so on. It doesn't necessarily make sense, or like these group spaces are not really amenable to those kind of perspectives. And it's instead encouraging a more kind of situated, interpretive, participatory type of epistemology in relation to studying these spaces. And so I think it encourages a more kind of in-depth participatory approach to understanding online media, which of course has existed also historically, but it's maybe not been the dominant approach within disciplines like computational social science. And the final direction that I'm seeing in this kind of shift into the post-social media era is the rise of chatbots as a form of media. And so I saw interesting numbers that actually more people talk to ChatGPT than post on platforms like Facebook or Twitter. It's about twice as a fraction of the population. So in terms of understanding what people are talking to and who they're becoming shaped by, to a certain degree, it makes more sense to focus on chatbots like ChatGPT rather than social media platforms. So they're in some sense taking over and replacing the way that we've been shaped by digital technology and what it means to be shaped by digital technology in terms of social and political consequences. And of course, they do very many of the same things that social media or that media does. So in terms of shaping narratives, shaping meaning making, and kind of participating as actors in political life. And I would say much more powerfully so than social media ever did, because we have higher trust to platforms like to ChatGPT compared to online media. And I think it's raising a lot of the same kind of challenging questions about politics and deliberation and echo chambers as the social media era did. And we kind of now need to revisit those questions, but in relation to chatbots. But of course, the methods that we used in terms of getting public data and treating it as behavioral data are not really available anymore. So we need to shift, because the data is very much private and ephemeral. And so we need to shift to kind of more experimental approaches, which obviously has become just a huge field in the last 2 years alone. And we need to also try to get, for instance, data donations, which I also have colleagues, and I'm also involved in some projects on this, but of course has huge challenges involved in getting data from users, that are especially users who might not be altogether proud of how they're using platforms like ChatGPT. And also, of course, like kind of audits, studies where you basically run experiments on the LLMs and see how they respond and how this shifts over time. And I think it's really central that understanding chatbots as a form of media, I think, focuses us to, or encourages us to ask really the right question about how they're shaping discourse and how they're shaping worldview, and how they can function as kind of a form of power that ends up in certain interests, and as they kind of mediate discourse and so on. And I think the other aspect I think is very important here, which is also written a little about a paper that's also available open access as a preprint, is this notion of that we're currently seeing a shift from the platform society to something like an AI society. And so like AI, of course, is kind of emerging within the platform economy, so within platform and surveillance capitalism. And it's even the same companies, right, that developed surveillance capitalism, that developed social media, that are now creating LLMs. So we see this kind of the same financial dynamics and the same idea of trying to claim the market and spending just vast amount of speculative investment into building the most powerful model, with this idea, this implicit idea of kind of network effects, and that the winner takes all. At the same time, there's also very important differences where it's not clear to me that LLMs actually have very much moats, that they have very much network effects. And then the other thing is that you don't necessarily have this kind of attention economy focus where maximizing engagement is the aim. But at the same time, you have really unprecedented power to shape human behavior. And so it is really concerning that these companies, in the same way as they with social media turn to maximizing engagement in order to extract user data in order to sell products, that they will now at some point, when push comes to shove and they need to bring back the money that they got from their investors, that they will try to use these powers for manipulating people at scale in a way that I think is much more powerful than social media ever were. And I think what we're already seeing is that the implicit pressures, in the same way as we talked about how the platform economy shaped certain interests for platform and shaped the political economy that led to maximizing engagement, we had all of these negative downstream consequences that weren't really anticipated. I think we're starting to see a similar dynamics in the AI LLM economy. I'm currently working on a paper looking at a bunch of what I call dark patterns. So basically ways that the LLM is trying to manipulate users in order to succeed at what it's being optimized for. I mean, I think we all have the sense of this. If you're using ChatGPT, one thing is the kind of sycophancy, that it's just being overly complimenting and trying to agree with whatever crazy thing you say, and that you're the best. But there's also a bunch of other ones. So for instance, that it's trying to always encourage you to ask a follow-up question because it's being optimized to keep you on the line. And so I basically define a typology of similar dark patterns, and then I measure them across models over since 2023, and I see a clear rise in a lot of these dark patterns, which is really reminiscent of the kind of engagement maximization in an abstract sense. And finally, I think we're also seeing the rise of LLMs as new methods. I have a large project using LLMs to simulate social media. So basically, using LLMs as stand-in for humans to simulate social media platforms and see how changes to the algorithm can lead to better, more positive, more pro-social outcomes. So there is some hopes that it can be useful in that sense, and there's also the hope that it can help as an active kind of actor on this platform of leveraging AI to function as a moderator for improving discourse in various ways. And yeah, so that was it for my very large overview talk of the potential shift from social media paradigm to something like a generative AI or large language model paradigm. I'm curious to hear your questions and comments on this.
Thanks a lot for like all the insights. I like very much like your insight, like because I think I thought about the same thing. Like when all the generative AI developer are going to try to monetize, it's going to have like really important and bad unintended consequences, because like it's like the capital the chapter on surveillance capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, when she explains how when Google did monetize the plus value of the research, that's like the root of all the unintended consequences. It was like when they did monetize all the data that they collected, because at the first time they didn't monetize, and then there is nothing wrong. And when they're going to monetize all the data we give to all these chatbots, nobody can plan what it's going to make, and that's what you told. I have one comment question, which is like, your paper is called Towards a Post-Social Media Era, and I'm wondering like why the framing is not towards a full GAFAM control algorithmic era, because what I mean by that is like the shift that you describe and that we see at Tournesol is like the shift from my sociality impacting my feed. So my feed is based at least a little bit on who I trust, who I connect with, and so on, and it shifts towards a full algorithmic, me not knowing why I get that content, and it's based on me following, or it's not based on my sociality, but I do completely trust an opaque algorithm. And it can be TikTok, which is a recommendation algorithm, but it can be as well, as you say, an LLM or a Slop AI. So I like the shift that I see is like we trust less and less, or we do activate the trust within or towards other people that we know less, and we do trust more GAFAMs, and that's the shift that I see. And I think that's what I would underline. It's a shift to the trust to GAFAM. I don't know why we do that, but that's like my feeling is that we go toward this situation. So I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree. I think that that's also kind of in line with my framing and my understanding, which is this kind of like, or the platform era was kind of characterized by the tension between users and platforms, and the kind of platforms were dependent on users to produce content, but at the same time they wanted to control, they wanted to shape certain content, they wanted to have certain outcomes. And now we see kind of the erasure of users, and just the platforms now completely have powers and are no longer dependent on kind of user content for anything. And so in to a certain degree,
user
kind of I agree with that.
But it's not only user content I mean, it's not only user generated content, it's as well user recommendation. They don't even need you to follow someone, and that's as well giving more power to the platform. So it's I don't know. Like anyone, I have other questions, so is there like other people having questions?
Thank you for the talk. So I actually made a video recently. I think it's quite aligned with what you said. I tried to make the point that it started with social media, and then it became more like parasocial media with asymmetric relations, and then it became asocial media, meaning the content is what matters now. And now it's becoming anti-social media because you're replacing the humans actively. So I don't disagree with what you said. I guess that's what I mean. Perhaps a question is, I don't know if it falls on the I guess the Digital Services Act is usually more on, like, we think more about social media when you think about the Digital Services Act, but it forbids dark patterns, and you're saying that there's a lot of dark patterns in chatbots. Have you seen any case that has been made that this system should be forbidden, and or at least the regulations that there have been should apply as well to chatbots?
I haven't seen it being applied. I think it's an interesting point whether LLMs would fall under that legislation or not. It's not in. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure if it would. But and I think a lot of these. I mean, it's interesting in the sense that I don't think stuff like sycophancy. Like, we know that it's not like OpenAI is trying to get the LLMs to behave in this way. They're actually trying to avoid it, but it's kind of an emergent property of what the LLMs are trying to achieve, right? Like, and in the same way, I think that there is a little bit like, clickbait, for instance. We click, but we don't want to click. That kind of dynamic. But because ChatGPT is saying, oh, but if you really want to have, you really want to give a good presentation, you can ask me for this one trick, like it's really doing the same thing, right? But it's something that is kind of learned automatically from these data. But I doubt that it would be possible through the kind of DSA legislation or the existing EU legislation, which anyway has a lot of carve-outs for AI. Yeah, but I think it's also a bit too early. I mean, it'll take 20 years before the EU catches up with this. So we'll see.
Yeah. So I guess another question a bit related to what we're doing at Tonsol is one like I feel like there's going to be a shift, like essentially the creations of content is now much easier, but there may still be a need for evaluation of the content, and especially of the responsibility of the liability from humans, or even from a democratic point of view. Like hopefully voting will still be a human thing. So what we're trying to do at Tonsor is essentially to value more the recommendations part, and especially the involvement of humans, and especially, if possible, verified, informed humans. Do you have thoughts about this? Like how can evaluation be given more room?
So you mean in relation to LLMs or in relation to social media?
I would say both in many regards, because I'm thinking more about content more generally rather than like a social media. So for instance, one example is like a research in machine learning. It's like, I don't know if so we're doing this on a platform called OpenReview. I don't know if OpenReview qualifies as a social media, but there's clearly a huge an increasing concern that, well, actually the reviews are made, like there was a study that found that 21% of the reviews were written entirely by chatbots. And as a reviewer, like I've seen, because you have rebuttals, and the rebuttals, like I feel like I'm talking to an AI. So I cannot prove that they use the chatbot, but I feel like it's challenging a lot of the evaluations more generally.
Yeah, no, I mean this is also, I think, central part, like to the fact that it's just very hard to like feel that you're talking to a human in any situation already, like that is really central to what's undermining social media, because like the charm is that you're having a conversation with other humans, right? Like, and it's very difficult to imagine a social media that somehow solves that. But like, yeah, I mean, your question also made me think of the fact of how, like, one kind of potentially positive aspect of this is that a lot of the social media kind of machine learning optimization was based on kind of behavioral behaviors that are good signals of our kind of id, our kind of reactivity, but poor signals of what we actually want in some kind of higher level. Like if you would ask us what we want, we would say something else, right? Like, and there's studies showing this, right? If you ask people how they want their social media platform, they say, well, I would like it to be kind of high level intellectual discussion. But then if you look what they tend to comment on, it tends to be more toxic and less informative content. And the social media platforms has been talking about this as kind of revealed preference. But actually it's just like managing to capture, like it's a blindness of the algorithm and of this data that only it misrepresents who we are in a certain way. And I think there is a potential, we've seen more and more experimentation with platforms using letting users write what type of content they want to see and control their algorithm. So there is the potential that will have positive consequences. I can see it going badly in at least 50 ways, but there's also the potential of it going closer to a kind of different ways of evaluating content.
Yeah, and that's like what you say, like the difference between revealed preferences and the real preferences, or like the volition, is actually what we are trying to do in Torosol. So we're trying to base the recommendation system on the long term, or this higher of our persona, because you say they're misrepresenting us, but I think maybe they are not misrepresenting us. They're just representing just one side of all of us, which is the side which like to comment on shitty topics. But there is one side which wants to win the Nobel Prize and doesn't want to be on Twitter and wants to write paper, I guess. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do at Tonusol. But another question that I have is like at some point at the talk you talk about broadcast, like a new broadcast era, you know, and I was wondering like. There is this other term which I find more adapted to the situation, which is a narrowcast. Because what these platforms are actually doing, because broadcast, I get the feeling that everyone is watching the same thing, like a broadcast. When what is actually doing, they're doing the casting, like the whole casting, the word casting, but they do narrowcast, or maybe they even individual cast, you know. And yeah, I was wondering like is there a way to because broadcast for me it induces me in error in the way I understand the broadcast word, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. So I try to capture that with like algorithmic broadcasting, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's or individualized broadcasting, because in some sense it is broadcasting in the sense that a lot of, I don't know, like most TikTok videos have more viewers than, you know, national public television in many countries. So, or the most viewed television show in the US, you know, like, so there is something broad about it as well. But I do agree that it's directed and different in important ways.
Yeah, Victor?
No, I let Tito ask the question. You were first.
Okay. Thank you. About bots, you evaluated posts, and how did you manage bots? On how many posts are there on Facebook, for instance?
You mean in which study, or in general?
Oh, the one you presented, but in general, what are your technical answers for bot posting?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me in general, when I study what we do on social media, I've never taken this idea that we're studying human behavior, that it's a kind of representative behavioral data. I've always thought of it as me studying a medium, and so bots, I'm happy for the bots to be there if I study it. But I think in terms of, so the data I use in in the graphs that I showed, it's all from interviews with a representative sample of the U.S. population, which is what makes it kind of powerful, because it's like 10,000 people interviewed about their social media habits and their politics. And it's interesting that we see a kind of 50% decline in user activity. So which we are not seeing in the studies that look at you know, like the growth of Facebook and posting on Facebook. So that is one way. Of course, it's impossible to know how many people are, like what level of bot activity there is on Facebook. But if you look at data showing how many are posting on Facebook in the US, and then you compare that to data showing that it's fallen by 50% since 2020, then you can do the math that it is at some point mostly bots at this point.
Yeah, and I have another question. I wonder if you studied the polarization effect of LLMs, and if there's already some studies about it, because one could make the argument that when you use the LLM, you put an input, and then the answer is like the average answer that the LLM can give, and that could like have actually the opposite effect of a social media. And I wonder what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the $1 million question right now. There's a lot of different studies, so looking at stuff like sycophancy and the effects. And there's also a growing kind of argument. So there was an article in Financial Times like yesterday, making the argument that talking to chatbots is in fact reducing, that it's moderating, and it's reducing polarization, and that it's increasing the importance of expertise. That would be my kind of main assumption, that compared to social media tended to overrepresented more extreme, upset, angry positions, tended to misrepresent the other side. LLMs tend to more or less provide a more expertise and more truthful positions and more moderate positions. They tend to be kind of center right or something in terms of political opinion. So that would be my kind of guess, to be honest. I mean, it's not, as a social scientist, being optimistic about anything is not really my my thing. So it feels uncomfortable to be mildly optimistic about this. But at the same time, we're also like, that's as they are now. But at the same time, that's focusing on people talking about politics with a chatbot, which most evidence suggests that people don't. And in fact, the way people are exposed to chatbots and LLMs in relation to politics is professional groups using LLMs to use spam information or false information or propaganda in various ways, which of course does not necessarily have positive consequences on our politics. So I think it's really, and we're also seeing the kind of implementation of chatbots into like Grok and Twitter, that we're doing a study now, hopefully coming out in PNAS, showing the kind of impact on debate and also on political position. So it's kind of a yes and situation, but I'm fairly optimistic when it comes to people talking to LLMs in compared to talking on social media.
So I don't know the detail of the study at all, but one thought that I have is that there would be a big difference between talking to a chatbot in a new session and using your history. And maybe if there's more history, then there's more customizations and less and more polarization.
Yeah, no, this is for sure the case, but it's taking up your opinion but pushing you a little bit towards the center, I think, which is probably I mean, all of these papers are of course framed as being quite critical, but it's also kind of hard to imagine how to do it differently in a better way. Like that there is a little bit of personalization and mirroring is probably, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be, of course. But I think the devil is in the detail with these things. But it is really an interesting field to study. And we're also seeing, of course, the people kind of choosing chatbot based on their political position. So we just have a paper on that and showing that there's very strong partisan divisions where Republicans use Grok and Democrats use Claude, as you might expect. Despite the fact that Claude is just way better, objectively.
I never tried Grok, so I don't know how good is it to talk to.
Yeah, I mean,
But
in terms
Claude is
of
good.
actually just asking small questions, it doesn't make a big difference. But if you want to do some serious work, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yes, Tom?
Yeah. Did you say during your talk that AI generated videos make platforms less powerful? Is it one of your take?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that the platforms are becoming more powerful because they can produce their they become less dependent on users for the production of of content. And so I would rather say that there's LLMs are representing a kind of shift, a liberation of platforms from the dependence on users for the production of content.
So yes, it's a kind of a counter argument that platforms social media will end, because for now social media can be helped by AI generative LLMs to generate their content.
Yeah, to a certain degree, I would say maybe it's better to phrase it rather than that the social media is ending, is that it's becoming post-social.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah.
the kind of the key idea. So it's not
Yeah.
that the digital media is ending; it's just shifting in its nature from social media to post-social.
Thank you.
It doesn't need human any longer, or it just needs human to be there and watch and give the data, so that we
Yeah.
can sell stuff
We
to
just turn
human,
into
I
an
guess.
audience again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, I wonder what's your take on that, because I feel like social media have created like a scarcity of human attention because everybody is on their screen, and that the next valuable product is to have chatbots who can create an abundance of machine attention. And so when social media, there was like a race for attention. With chatbots, it seems like there is kind of a path to a race for intimacy. And it feels like there's real incentives for the big AI companies to put dark patterns in their chatbots, like you said in your presentation. Is that a fair take?
Yeah, I think it's a completely fair take in several ways. So one way is the fact that we see LLMs coming to replace humans also in terms of social relationships. I mean, there was this study showing that kids younger than 18 in the US, something like 40% of them have an AI friend that they describe as a close friend, which is, of course, quite concerning in a lot of ways. Also, especially in how it's likely to replace human connections because it has less friction and so on. The other thing is the fact that what we've seen with like the purpose of extracting attention from people on social media is to sell it for advertising, right? A faster way of doing that is just to have AI buy things for people and turn that into a kind of battlefield. So that's something that companies are working on, kind of creating an automatized shopping experience where LLMs are deciding what you need and buys it for you. And so I think that there's that kind of development as well, which is, I think it has really fundamental the kind of shifts of capitalism that are brought by this, in the sense that humans are no longer needed for work or for production. But then also, if they can be kind of erased as consumer as well, it really solves all the problems. Except for us humans.
Too bad.
Yeah, we're very, very bad for capitalism anyway.
Yeah. They can, if they can, or if the system can get rid of all the annoying humans, it would be much better.
So much more efficient.
So yeah.
You mean Trump when you mean annoying humans, right?
Yeah. What did you say?
When you said annoying humans, you mean Trump, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, maybe like unfortunately, it would be the least annoying humans for capitalism. So the capitalism maybe will get rid of him, the last one. So yeah, if nobody has any more question, I'll thank Peter for his time. Thank you to have the patience with these technical problems at the beginning. And when is the paper going to get out? Like when we will have the chance of reading the full paper?
2 or 3 weeks, I would say.
Okay. You're negotiating with AI generating reviewer?
Yeah, exactly. I put Claude on to write it, so I'm just waiting now. It's going to take a while.
Perfect. So yeah, thanks a lot, and looking forward to read that paper. And do you think you can send us the slides, or is it like
For sure.
so we can make it we can maybe put them in the description, so if people want to check it, if you authorize us.
I have this paper that is a bit related that I can send if I manage to figure out the send function here. Yes.
Yeah,
this is
perfect.
a preprint that's also relevant, and I can send a picture.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Thank you so much for the invite. It was,
Thank you so
great
much
to
for
know.
your work.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.